Hello, my friends. Hello, as I sit back after hitting the start button. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's Matthew Street. Welcome to my channel. As always, I truly appreciate you being here. And folks, are you ready to take a trip back in time with me? Are you ready to get into the Matthew Street time machine and go back a half a century, 50 years to 1974 with me and get into some great music? I'm sure ready. Folks, I've got to do a video like this. I've seen so many videos on YouTube where people are really blowing my mind with the albums that are now 50 years old. I can't believe it. 2024, go all the way back in that time machine to 1974, and it just knocks me out that some of the albums that have been shown are that old, because it makes me feel old, because I still feel like me, no matter how old you get or what age you get into, whether you're in your teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s like me, you still feel like that same old person you were. You still have the same interests, the same basic personality and whatnot. You gain some wisdom and whatnot, but, you're basically the same person you were when you were younger. And I think back to that young boy back in 1974, especially the summer of 74, and being a middle school aged kid, and loving music, really heavily into the Beatles by that point. I mean, I was collecting the albums left and right. I was getting into other rock music, other pop music. Many of the albums I owned are here today, and I will show you those from back in the day, 50 years ago. And many here are from my parents, who, believe it or not, even though they were in their early 40s back in 1974, they still were turned on to some new modern pop music and rock music by my older cousins, by other friends of theirs that were a little younger. Sometimes my dad would go into the record store near where he worked called Jordan Marsh in Boston, and he would pick up albums there, and they would have workers there that would recommend music to you. So he would get into some albums that way and bring them home. Some really cool modern music, which I'm going to show you some of them today. And so, folks, let's take that time trip back. See what you think, because I've been enjoying seeing what is now 50 years old, and I can't wait to show you. So I have a bunch of CDs here and a lot of vinyl, and so let's do it. Let's go back, and I'll say a couple of words about each one, and then we'll be out of here, I promise. So the first one I want to show you is the first album by Kiss. Now, I got into Kiss a little later than this. I probably got into Kiss around 1976 or so with the Destroyer album when I was a little older, like 14 or 15. But 1974, the first Kiss album came out. Now, this album I was into from day one. This goes back to when I was a middle school age student. John Denver's Back Home Again album with Annie's Song, and I'm Sorry is on here, and Back Home Again. It just so Grandma's Feather Bed. There's so many great songs on here. Picture him and Annie on the front cover. Love this album. Queen, Sheer Heart Attack, is now 50 years old. Can you believe it? I believe Killer Queen is on here. I mean, it's just an unbelievably great album by theirs. Again, with Queen, I got into them a couple of years later. I think with them it was like that album in 77, Night at the Opera. Oh no, Day at the Races, I think was the first Queen album I really got into, although I heard the single Bohemian Rhapsody the year before or so, around 75, 76. But it was 77 with the Day at the Races album I really got into the band Queen. Wow, can you believe it? 50 years ago they put this album out, which is a great one, and they just put out another great one in 2023. I'm talking about the Rolling Stones' It's Only Rock and Roll album. Last one with Mick Taylor on guitar, and I'm sorry, I love Ronnie Wood, love Brian Jones, but Mick Taylor was my favorite lead guitarist in the Rolling Stones. I mean, this is a great album. It's just absolutely fantastic. Time Waits for No One on here. The guitar playing by Mick Taylor is second to none. Love it. 50 years old. And love this band. Came into them a little after this album. This is Electric Light Orchestra, ELO, with El Dorado. I remember seeing this album. Some kids had it in middle school, but I didn't really get into them until like a year or so later. It was either with the New World record in 76 or the one just before that. I forget the name of it now. But I think it had Evil Woman on it or something. But anyway, This one, love it as well. 50 years old. Okay, here's a few. Little beat up, some of these, but these go back. These are all originals, folk. The Average White Band album. Who remembers this one from 1974? Hamish Stewart, who later played with Paul McCartney and Paul McCartney's band on a couple of his albums, Flowers in the Dirt, Off the Ground, I believe. And you had Pick Up the Pieces on here. Yeah, there's some great stuff on this album, folks. Average White Band, 1974. Charlie Daniels Band, Fire on the Mountain, is now 50 years old. Can you believe it? You know, I'll do my best to show a little bit if I can, but we want to get through these. Leonard Skinner, Second Helping, 1974. Phew. Can you believe it? Some of these albums and the age of them. If they have a gatefold, I'll try to show you, like Charlie Daniels one. Average White Band did not have a gatefold, and the Skinnerd one does not. Wow, 50 years old, and I forget if this is self-titled or what, but I want to say maybe it's self-titled. Marshall Tucker Band. All right, if I'm sorry with the lighting in here, I can't see if there is a title. There's definitely not one on the front that I can see. But Marshall Tucker Band album is 50 years old this year, and it does have a gatefold. All right. Okay, you all know this guy. Well, no, you all don't probably know this guy, Tom Rush. How many have heard of Tom Rush? Here's an album right here. I think it's just self-titled, Tom Rush, I believe. And it's from 1974. Steely Dan, Pretzel Logic. Very well-known album, very well-loved album from 1974. And does not have a gatefold. And who remembers The Four Tops, Meeting of the Minds? 1974. The Four Tops. There you go. Get a little gander at that. Okay, moving on. Chicago 7 is 50 years old now. This was my dad's. My dad was big. My mom liked them a little bit. My dad had a lot of the early Chicago albums. He had like Chicago 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, I can think of. Maybe a couple more. The early period. The first, in that first 10 album period of theirs. My dad loved them. He loved brass from his old days as a teenager in the 40s. He loved that kind of music. And Chicago brought it up to the modern era. And he loved this album, Chicago 7. So that's a tribute to my dad, who's upstairs resting right now. We just went to breakfast a little while ago. All right. This was the final Fanny studio album. I can't even remember the title of it. I don't remember. Someone help me. Like I said, lighting here is dark. Rock and Roll Survivors. Rock and Roll Survivors, Fanny. They had a lineup change by this album, but it's still a great album. It's Fanny. I love Fanny. They were probably the first, or one of the first, hard-driving, rocking, all-female rock bands. And they have some great music out there. Check them out. Fanny, Rock and Roll Survivors. And this is Todd Rundgren's Utopia, 1974. Who remembers this one? Half a century old. And Archetypes, The Velvet Underground, came out in 1974. All right, I know I'm not a real big Velvet Underground fan. Someone gave this to me. I'm glad to have it. It's an original, but I'm not a huge fan of theirs. But nice to have it, and it is 50 years old. Okay, final little stack here, folks, and I will be out of here, I promise. Okay. This was one of my dad's, believe it or not. I think my cousin recommended it to him, and he picked it up, and it was always around. I remember gazing at the cover of this thing, looking at it, and now I have it. The Doobie Brothers, What Were Vices Are Now Habits. 1974. This is one of my dad's old ones. And again, he was in his early 40s when he got this, and he was into it. So God bless him. All right, this is definitely one of mine because I had the single. And then eventually I got the album. I don't think I got the album right away with the single, but definitely a short time later. It's Paper Lace and their album, Paper Lace. And their big hit song on here, the one I really wanted, was The Night Chicago Died. Who remembers that from 1974? And they also did a version, they were the originals to do Billy Don't Be a Hero. But unfortunately, there was some kind of mix-up or something getting it released here in the United States. So Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods took Billy Don't Be a Hero to the top of the charts. So here's 1974's self-titled Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods. And you can see Billy Don't Be a Hero's on there. And oh, this happens to be a gatefold. So you can look at Bo Donaldson and all the Haywoods. Oh my goodness. My sweetie, my love, she's right back here. Olivia Newton-John. And her 1974 album, If You Love Me, Let Me Know. Olivia, I love you, and I'm letting you know. What a great, great artist. I miss her so much. What a beautiful person, what a beautiful voice, charitable, helpful to others, and just a great, great album. 50 years ago this year. Oh, this was a big one. This you heard on 8-track, cassette, vinyl. People, I'm sure, had the reel-to-reel. I certainly didn't. But I remember being in people's cars and them playing the 8-track of this over and over again, and I loved it so much that I went out and got the vinyl. The Beach Boys' Endless Summer. I know it's a compilation, but it's 50 years ago this year, 2024, and this is just absolutely stunning. It's a beautiful double compilation of some of the greatest music ever made, greatest pop music ever made. Not a bad song on here. This was the soundtrack of the summer for everybody in the United States in 1974. This one was my mom's album, and I, in the interest of privacy, she put stickers all over her albums with her name on it, so when she brought the album to parties and stuff, it wouldn't get, like, misplaced or something. So this is my mom's copy of Elton John's Greatest Hits. This album was massive. Any of you that were around then, you can back me up on this. When this Elton John Greatest Hits came out, it sold a gazillion copies. And everybody loved it. Look at that track list. How can you beat it? This was just absolutely stunning, fabulous album. Mom, you ruined, may she rest in peace. Mom passed away a little over 5 years ago. But we loved her, and she loved music, and she loved this Elton John album. Even though, like I said, when it came out, she was in her early 40s, but this thing, it just reminds me of her every day. And Mom, but why did you put stickers on all your records? Now I know where I got my bad habit of putting Scotch tape on all my Beatles albums edges to protect them, which didn't do that. I must have got it from Mom. So anyway, well, we're getting into some of the big guns now. John Lennon, Walls and Bridges, 1974. Wow, 50 years old, and I hope we'll see a deluxe version of this album in the near future. This was a little beat up. I have a better copy in more pristine condition. I just grabbed this one. This was at a radio station. They were unloading, they were shutting down and unloading a lot of their old records. And I grabbed this at a store somewhere. But it's Ringo Starr, Goodnight Vienna, WRIU, must have been Rhode Island University or Rhode Island College AM radio back in the day, 50 years ago. But this was their copy of it. They had it labeled and everything up here with the radio station. But I grabbed it, so I just thought I'd show you this one because it happened to be the one I found. But, yep, I love the Ringo album. It's definitely my top 1 or 2 favorite Ringo albums of all time, along with Time Takes Time. But this is right up there, number 3 or 4. For some reason, I was a young middle schooler when this one came out. I loved the Ringo album, but I love this one just as much. Now, looking back on it in history, we know that the Ringo album is head and shoulders the better album than this. But this is still, in my world, a fantastic Ringo Starr album and always will be top echelon Ringo as far as I'm concerned. Ringo Starr's Goodnight Vienna 50 years ago. Another Beatle. Now, I was going to include Band on the Run a little bit, but I said, it came out late 73 officially, even though a lot of the singles and follow-up singles were big in early 74. So honorable mention to Paul McCartney's Band on the Run, being 50 years old as well. But officially, it came out in late 73. But not George's. George's Dark Horse album came out in 74. It was his follow-up to Living in the Material World, an album I love. This one, in my world, does not measure up to Living in the Material World or All Things Must Pass. Not one of the better George Harrison albums, although I will say it's good. I can listen every once in a while. I get the hankering to listen to Dark Horse, and I do. All right, now we're going into my final three, and these are my three big guns, my three big power pop rock and roll trilogy right here, all right? And two of them begin with the letter B. No, not the Beatles. They were the decade before. Radio City by Big Star. Folks, if you're a fan of early 70s rock and roll, power pop, the pioneers of power pop, you need this album. Folks, you'll love it. September Girls is on it. It's absolutely fantastic, wonderful piece of music here. Both of Big Star's albums, the first two, I should say, #1 record, and then Radio City, they're must-haves if you're a fan of rock and roll. You've got to have these albums, so pick up Radio City. It's 50 years old this year. The next one, oh my goodness, and this is Stephen Schnee's favorite album in the whole world. Badfinger, Wish You Were Here. 50 years old in 2024. Can you believe it? Love Badfinger, love everything by them, but folks, I'm not going to say this is my favorite album of all time, but boy, it's up there. It's up in the top 10 or 20. It's probably my favorite Badfinger album. I love Wish You Were Here. If you've never heard it, check it out. One of the best ever produced. Great. And last but not least, I don't know, this could be one of my favorite top 1 or 2 favorite albums from 1974 because I love this band. They only put out 4 studio albums, but in my young life as a middle school age kid, 11, 12, 13 years old, this band was it for me. After the Beatles and some of the 60s stars, this was like my first 70s band that I really got into. I'm talking the Raspberries, Starting Over, their final studio album on Capitol Records. And I absolutely adore this album. Adore Starting Over. Here's the back. You could check out some of the track listing here. I don't know how that's going to translate, but we'll try. And it's just the one I think it is. Yeah, the original pressing came with a poster of the Raspberries. Give you a gander at that. Folks, I can't stress enough how good Starting Over by the Raspberries is. This is probably out of the 4, and I love all 4 of Raspberry's studio albums on Capitol Records. This is my favorite. It's just fantastic. It is the best. I love it. Folks, if you've never heard it or never gotten into the Raspberries, do yourself a favor. Check out their music, especially Starting Over, 1974 to 2024, 50 years old. That's it, folks. A little quick fun. I know I went 18 minutes or so, but I just want to show you a bunch of cool things and take you back on a time travel trip. Hopefully brought back some memories for you. Hopefully gave you some ideas of some things you can pick up and listen to yourself. Go for it. Have fun. Happy 2024, everybody. Love you all. Bye-bye.